The prophet Elijah takes on the prophets of Baal. What an interesting story. Amusing in some places, inspiring in other places, disturbing in some ways. So let's get to it. So we have this story. I'll give you some of the context and background. Who is Baal? Baal is short for Beelzebub, god of fertility, Lord of the Flies. If you've ever heard of the novel Lord of the Flies, that name does come from the ancient pagan god Beelzebul. It's Satan. People who worship Baal, worship Beelzebub, don't maybe know that they're actually worshiping the fallen angel, who we know as the devil. But that's who is behind the power of Baal. So sometimes when we read these stories of people with these false gods, we wonder, why would they worship idols that obviously don't do anything? Well, I wouldn't wouldn't be so quick to assume that nothing supernatural is afoot in the ancient world. When people are worshiping Baal, they are actually invoking a supernatural being who is real and who exists. But one who, as we see in this story, is no match for the one true God. So the people, why are they worshiping Baal? Well, they've been led astray by their leaders. They've followed their leaders. So King Ahab of Israel. So this is well after the split. Remember, we several months ago talked about the split with Solomon's son Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and now we have Judah in the south and Israel in the north. So the northern kingdom of Israel has King Ahab, and he is heavily influenced by his wife, a real wicked woman named Queen Jezebel. And Jezebel comes from a pagan background. She's not a native Israelite. She imports her false Baal religion, her Baal worship, to Israel, and the entire nation is worshiping Beelzebub or Baal. Uh, they have not completely neglected Yahweh, and this is really important to point out. All the times we read in the Old Testament, there are many times in the Old Testament that we read about God's people turning to idols and turning to false worship. In many cases, they continue to hold out some religious practices of following Yahweh, the true God. They don't follow his commands the way that they should, but they do try to maintain this identity as followers of Yahweh. They don't go to Jerusalem and worship in the temple with the kingdom of Judah, but they do believe that they are following Yahweh. And this is particularly important for us as Elijah. Actually, the challenge Elijah has for these people is that he is asking them. I'm reading from verse 21. Elijah says to the people, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Limping between two opinions. How fascinating. They want a foot in both worlds. They want to try to have it both ways. It seems more inclusive that way, perhaps. They're not closing anything off. They're being open-minded. And when Elijah asks them to actually commit to a certain path, they say absolutely nothing. So Elijah says we're going to have a contest, and it's a fascinating contest and simple enough from a narrative standpoint that you should be able, even the youngest kids can kind of comprehend a little bit of what's going on here today. But Elijah says the one who sends fire from heaven, he's the true God, worship him. So Baal people, you go first. And the Baal people spend hours trying to convince Baal to send fire from heaven. They cut themselves so that they can wail, so that in their pain they can make more noise. That's the disturbing, practical effect of their self-harm, is that now with more pain they can yell louder and maybe Baal can hear them. And Elijah famously mocks them even as they're yelling, yeah, why didn't you yell louder? Maybe he is in the bathroom relieving himself. He's on the toilet. He's having a particularly hard time after maybe his digestive system isn't acting the way that it should. Give him a little time. Now, obviously, Elijah is showing that he is just fearless of mocking Baal. Yeah, normally, if you have any kind of a fear of a god, you wouldn't talk about his bodily functions for fear of extreme retribution. But Elijah has no fear of retribution from Baal. He's mocking Baal openly. And then, after several hours pass and Baal is silent, Elijah says, "Okay, my turn. But before I go, why don't you dig a trench and fill it with water and douse the altar with water so it is wet as can possibly be?" So he wants to actually make the challenge harder for himself than the Baal worshippers had to contend with. And after they dig the trench and fill it with water and douse the water, Elijah says, "Okay, God." And bam, here comes the fire from heaven, and it consumes everything on the altar so that everything then becomes bone dry. And it's a very definitive way of showing who is the one true God. At this point, Elijah asserts a victory. He has the prophets of Baal rounded up and summarily executed. And things in Israel turn around. Actually, no, they don't. There is the end of a drought as Elijah prays for rain, and there is rain that comes from the heavens. But actually, by the end of the story, Elijah is on the run. King Ahab and Queen Jezebel are not happy that the Baal worship has been exposed as a sham, and they put out a hit on Elijah, and he has to go run for his life. And that's actually where the following lesson for Sunday school will pick up in the next week. So, what are some things to take away from this lesson? Well, I think the first thing we have to kind of wrestle with is this is a great show of definitive reality here by our God. He shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that He's God. Isn't that nice? Why doesn't He do that for us? And as much as we would love to be able to be vindicated in front of all the people of the world and to show that, hey, we're right, you're wrong, God doesn't do what he did for Elijah the same way that he does for us. Couple ways to think through this. One is the moment of vindication. Who gets to choose this moment of vindication? Who's the one who said to Elijah, "Okay, Elijah, time to prove once and for all to the people of Israel who's the real God"? You know, it wasn't that Elijah woke up one morning and said, "Today's the day." Elijah had been on the run for a couple of years at this point. He had to wait for his moment of vindication. And so it is with us as well. There will come a moment of vindication, but it's not on our terms, it's on the Lord's terms. Until then, he does call us to faith. The people of Israel had enough to know. They should have known who would win this contest. There will come a day when it's definitively revealed. Our calling is to maintain the faith, to proclaim the faith, but not necessarily to expect that vindication for faith on our timetable. It does come. This also makes me think of one of the temptations of Christ when the devil comes to Jesus. One of the temptations is throw yourself off the temple. You won't die, angels will catch you. Now, the interesting thing here, of course, Jesus wouldn't have needed angels to catch him. He can actually, he wouldn't have necessarily fallen to the ground. But what is the devil really tempting here? What is he really suggesting that Jesus does? The devil wants Jesus to prove to anyone, this is a pretty public place at this point. If Jesus suddenly shows up in the sky with angels, then there's no doubt he's the Son of God. I suppose some people still would say, oh, it's an illusion. You're never going to win with some people. But the point is, Jesus is being tempted here to act ahead of schedule. There will come a day he's going to be vindicated here, but it's not when the day the devil suggests. It's the day that God the Father has drawn up to reveal and glorify his Son. And so this is important for us to remember here. We're not Elijah today challenging people to a duel. We don't get to determine the timetable, but we can take away this knowledge that there will come a day of vindication when Jesus returns. And our calling is, let's be ready for that day, and let's not be surprised when that day actually happens. But as we wait for this day, let's not only not be the prophets of Baal, but boy, one of the real lessons here, the people of Israel who are limping between two opinions. And I don't know about you, but I think this is pretty convicting for myself. I try to follow the first commandment to fear, love, and trust God above all things. But how often do we go limping between two opinions? How often? No, I mean, I don't think there's many people here today who worship the pagan god Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. But do we sacrifice on altars other than the one for the true Yahweh? Do we give of ourselves wholeheartedly to God, or do we often sacrifice even our lives to the things of this world? Do we pour our physical health and our time and our money and financial resources into into pursuits that not only do not fulfill us but drain us, take away our precious resources, and deplete our ability to be of service to the kingdom of God? Whether that's our jobs, even good things like our jobs, and our families, who are a gift and a blessing from God. But do we sometimes put even our families ahead of our God? Sports and athletics and recreational pursuits and all the things of the world, pursuing pleasures of various kinds. That's what and actually that's even worse in some ways than what the Baal worshippers, what they're trying to do by worshiping Baal is ensure that their crops are going to grow. They're not chasing idle pleasures. They're chasing their hope of life. The fertility god. They're hoping to maintain their crops, and the next generation may come. And they're mistaken by thinking Baal can do this for them. But that's why they're so divided, and they're trying to cover their bases and hedge their bets and make sure that they're open to all the possibilities. We don't need to be open to all the possibilities. We have the one truth. There is one God, and Jesus is our one Lord for us to follow. So this story ought to convict us. We ought to put ourselves on Mount Carmel here and think about this call from Elijah the prophet. But also know this, that sacrifice that was given, that sacrifice that was accepted by God. There is nothing that was going to keep that sacrifice from being consumed by the Lord. No matter how much water was doused, God was going to take that sacrifice. This is good news for us. Where is Jesus in the story? He is the sacrifice. He is the acceptable sacrifice. The fire, the wrathful flame of God that's unhappy with our limping between two opinions. That's been completely satisfied. That wrath of God has been satisfied on Christ, and the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross is all sufficient for us, so that we may not doubt that even though we have gone between two opinions, the Lord restores us and forgives us. And just as the people of Israel then, who God easily could have rejected for the fact that they rejected him and his ways, he graciously used this occasion to take them back, to drive away the prophets of Baal, just as the Lord will graciously one day drive away all of the demons of Satan from attacking us, and he will graciously bring us back to his kingdom. He showed in this contest with Elijah that he's willing to do whatever it takes to bring us back. He showed even more so with Christ on the cross. Final thought as to where Jesus is in this story. So this story is not going to be real persuasive for the unbeliever today. Hey, did you know that one time God sent a sacrifice on Mount Carmel? He sent fire from heaven? Yeah, right. We're not going to convince anyone that this happened. We believe it's happened, and that's good for us. But the vindication that God has given us, that one day there will be a greater vindication when Christ returns. But until that day, the ultimate vindication is Christ's resurrection. And although there are many who disbelieve and doubt that, This is the reality that we believe that gives us the vindication. This is how God has shown who He is, that He is the one true God, that we don't need to hedge our bets and have any other idols, because there's only one guy who came back from the dead, never to die again. That is the ultimate vindication. So as you think today about, wouldn't it be nice if God did something to prove Himself? He actually did. He sent Jesus to die, but also to rise for us. So I think we covered kind of our main points in the course of my explanation there. You know, what does the story tell us about God and His tender mercies? He will stop at nothing. He shows who He is. He showed it in this contest, but also in the risen Lord, and He will show again. One day He will reveal Himself, but He wants us to be ready for that day, which is why He's given us stories like this, so that we may be ready for the day when He does come in His glory in the fires of the sky. What does the story tell us about who we are as God's people? That we are God's people and our allegiances are not split. We don't need any other gods. We don't need to follow Baal or any other idols in this world. Whereas Jesus in the story, He's in the sacrifice, He's also in the vindication. And finally, how do we live as God's people? Again, we live with the help of Christ under one Lord Jesus Christ, and our allegiances are not split. God bless you. God bless your lessons this weekend.